I had a very difficult time looking people in the eye because I thought that if I were to look people in the eye, I would see them staring at my skin or my teeth. So instead, I just kind of look down when talking to people. And as I'm sure as you all know, middle school can potentially be a judgmental environment. So it became very difficult for me to make friends when I couldn't look people in the eye when talking to them. But eventually, with some time, I ended up making friends with this group of three other girls. And I remember thinking, this is awesome. This is the first time I can remember feeling like I had belonged to something, like a sense of belonging. And me and these three other girls became inseparable. So we started doing everything together. And I grew up in a really small town, just another side note. So all of us were associated with one another. So if one of us was brought up to like a group of people or something like that, we would all be associated with one another because we were such a close knit, tight group of people. But with some time, I started to find out about these girls hanging out without me. And immediately I had blamed myself because I thought there has to be something that's wrong with me or defective about me for these girls to specifically go out of their way to hang out without me. And that seed that I had mentioned, that seed of self doubt, started to sprout, it started to grow a bit more from here. So, bringing it from here, I started off high school. So I started off high school going into it with a very similar attitude that I started off middle school with. I was thinking, okay, like this is like a fresh start, a new beginning. I went into high school feeling really, really great, feeling confident that I was going to turn some things around. I was going to look people in the eye more. I was going to make more friends and connections, friends that wouldn't hang out without me. And I was generally feeling pretty good about starting off high school. But within a couple of weeks of starting off high school, I ended up getting my first boyfriend. And yes, I say got my first boyfriend because I treated having a boyfriend like it was this honor that had to be earned. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about this boyfriend. So his name is Jim, and he was a junior at the time, and I was a freshman. So at my high school at the time, I don't know if this is still like a something that's common in high schools or anything like that, or even in middle schools. But it was supposed to be a very big deal that this junior was going out with a freshman. And to top it off, he was also the school's golf star. So he was always in the paper for his golf achievements. They would always, on the morning announcements, they would always announce his achievements for the tournament that he did that weekend. And a lot of the light that was shine on to him for his golf career would be reflected onto me just because I was associated with him. And I really liked that feeling of positive attention for something. All of my friends, or at least so I thought, were really good at something, like a class or a sport. But I didn't have anything that really made me stand out from the crowd, anything that made me feel like I was special or good at something different. So when all of this light was being shed onto Jim for his golf career and reflected onto me, I really, really enjoyed that feeling. And to top it off, not just him being the school's golf star and older and really cute and this and that, I ended up falling in love with him, or at least what I thought love was at that time in my life. And what I knew about love at that time in my life is what I had read in books or saw in movies. So I was under the impression that love was just this happy go lucky fantasy all the time, nothing ever went wrong. And I learned very, very quickly that that wasn't the case. And if you can go to the next slide, please. And in the midst of that, I found out that I have very, very big feelings. And the difference, I want to say, between everyday human nature emotion and these really, really big feelings is that these big feelings were crippling to me in a sense. So if Jim and I had some sort of disagreement that day, it became very difficult for me to be able to get out of bed and go on with my day because all I could focus on was that disagreement. It would kind of take over my day, over my mind. I couldn't focus on anything else. But on the other side of things, when things were going really good between me and Jim, I felt like I was on cloud nine. I would, every night before I went to school, I would lay out all my clothes. The next day, I would wake up, I would curl my hair, I'd do my makeup, I'd walk down. He was at the school I was at the time, had like a basement, and that's where his locker was. So I would walk down to the basement and I would meet him as his locker. He would always have these little notes for me. He would slip me a little love note, and we'd walk down the hallway. We had like a 6-inch height difference between us. So we'd walk down the hallway, we'd look really cute together, this and that, and I felt really good walking down the hallway with him, and I overall felt like I was on cloud nine with this guy. And because he was my first boyfriend, I had absolutely nothing to compare him to. Everything that went on within our relationship I had deemed as normal because this was my first relationship, and it was normalized to me because, like I said, nothing to compare him to. So I was under the impression at the time that Jim and I were going to spend the rest of our lives together. We were going to get married and have a happily ever after because I didn't see any reason for us to break up by any means. So, about 3 months into our relationship, things were going really, really well. I'm under this impression that I'm gonna spend the rest of my life with him, and this is giving me a breath of fresh air. It's making me feel relieved because I'm thinking that I no longer have to search for this person. I no longer have to find this person. In my head, I'm thinking, finally, I have something laid out in front of me, like a clear, consistent path ahead of me, and that was Jim. 3 months into our relationship, he wanted to take things to the next level between us, and I didn't feel ready. And me thinking that, we have the rest of our lives because we're going to get married, I said no. And he didn't feel that way, and he ended up breaking up with me. And when Jim broke up with me, this did two things to me. This one caught me off guard because I genuinely thought we were going to get married. And two, this destroyed me in a sense. And what I mean by destroyed me is that it being kind of hard to get out of bed in the morning became nearly impossible. Just the thought of seeing Jim in the hallway, seeing one of Jim's friends in the hallway, or even hearing Jim's name gave me this pit in my stomach. And I'd get really hot and sweaty and antsy, and I just didn't want to have to deal with that feeling. A couple days after our breakup, I did make it to school, and one of my friends came up to me, and she told me that she had heard a group of girls talking about me. So I said, "Oh, about what?" And she said that those girls had talked to Jim. And he told those girls and the majority of the school that I am prude and that I am no fun. And that's why he broke up with me. Now, the best way to define ourselves is through ourselves. But I defined myself through every relationship that I had at the time. So if Jim were going around and telling people that I was this really cool, fun, awesome girl, I probably would have deemed that as my reality. But because he was going around telling people that I was no fun, in my head, that became my reality. If you go to the next slide, please. And this is when I had developed anxiety. So my anxiety's voice was constantly telling me things that weren't true. You're not enough. You're stupid. You're dumb. No one likes you. No one cares about you. What's the point? When my anxiety told me these things, I wholeheartedly believed that they were true. But the thing is, my true healthy self knows that these things aren't true. But I couldn't define my true healthy self's voice from my anxiety's voice at the time because I didn't even know anxiety was a thing at the time. I didn't even know this was coming from a place of negative self talk. I just believed that this was my reality, and I defined myself through this anxiety's voice. But the thing is, when you're able to separate your anxiety's voice from your true healthy self's voice, it's that much easier to redirect those negative thoughts into something a lot more positive. But like I said, I didn't do that at the time because I didn't know I had anxiety at the time, and I didn't even know that was a tool I could use at the time. So my anxiety's voice was constantly beating out my true healthy self every single time. And it continued to do this for about 3 months after my relationship with Jim. And this is when I had met Sean. So I had met Sean, and everything that I just described to you guys with my relationship with Jim, these feelings of love and what I thought was love and connection and kind of obsessiveness. I was pretty obsessed with Jim at that time. I felt with Sean, but 10 times harder than I ever felt with Jim. And you may think this is impossible because of that obsession with Jim. But to put it into perspective, Jim is who I thought I was going to marry at the time. And Sean is who I thought was like my absolute soulmate at the time. And that's because I was not just latching on to Sean himself, but I was latching on to the idea of Sean, that idea of a meaningful future. When I looked at him, I didn't just see my boyfriend at the time. I saw that future. I saw that house. I saw that car. I saw that dog. I saw kids. I just saw this happy, meaningful future that again just gave me that breath of fresh air. Because it was like, okay, I finally have something laid out in front of me again. I finally have a path, a meaningful future, something that I can follow. So I felt that relief. And very quickly, Sean not only became my boyfriend, but he became my best friend. He became a support system for me. He became someone that I could support. And he became someone that I put all of my energy and time into. Everything came in second place, priority wise, when it came to Sean. And I dated him for about 8 months. And at that time, these were the best 8 months of my life at that time. I felt so connected, so wonderful, so included, and like I had that sense of belonging once again. And about 8 months into our relationship, Sean started to act a little strange. And I didn't think a lot of it because I finally developed that trust again, that trust that I had lost really harshly in my relationship with Jim. So I had that trust again. And after him acting kind of strange for about a week, didn't think much of it because I had that trust again, he ended up breaking up with me. And when he broke up with me, he said that I had changed. Now, at the time, I was also going to Catholic school on Sundays. And it was all around the time of Lent. And if you guys don't know what Lent is, it's when you give something up for a certain period of time in Catholic school. So in my head, Sean is telling me that I had changed. I'm thinking at the same time that the only thing that has changed about me in the last 8-month time span when I was dating him is that I might have gained some weight. Lent is happening. So I'm connecting the pieces together. And I got in my head that I thought that if the only thing that changed in me in those 8 months was my weight, that maybe if I could make my body as perfect as possible, then Sean would want me back and we would be together again and we would have that happily ever after. So during Lent, I decided that I was going to give up all foods that I thought were unhealthy. And I'm putting quotes around this because there's not necessarily a thing as healthy or unhealthy. Food is just food, and I was labeling it. And some of it is more nutritionally dense than others, but I was putting really hard labels on it based off of diet culture and things that I had learned about food and my relationship with food. And I just cut out a ton of food groups. And this is when I became a perfectionist. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So, perfectionism, I thought it was going to make my world so much easier. But in reality, perfectionism actually makes our world a lot harder because we're striving and striving for something that isn't even there. It's not attainable. But I didn't know it wasn't attainable at this time because I was just trying so hard and grasping so hard to just be perfect for Sean because I thought that if I was perfect, Sean would want me back. I thought that if I was perfect, my friends wouldn't leave me out. I thought that everything would just be so much easier in my world if I was perfect. But the thing is, perfectionism is a very dangerous state of mind in an imperfect world. It's impossible to be perfect. But I didn't see that. I didn't recognize that that was a thing. No one was telling me that, hey, you can't be perfect. It's not possible. So in my head, I was 110% determined to be as perfect as possible, have the most perfect body possible, and then Sean would want me back. And because I had cut out some of these foods out of my diet, my body did naturally start to change. And Sean started to notice, and he would start to invite me over more. And when he would invite me over more, it would kind of reinforce my plan. I would think, great, my plan is working. He's seeing that I'm losing weight and that I look really awesome and that he wants me over more. And then he's going to realize how great I am and he's going to want me back. But the thing about this is that every time I went over to his house, I found out about other girls that he was hanging out with. And I would get upset, rightfully so, because I only had eyes for Sean. I was trying everything I could to have him back. I was striving to have him back. And when I found out that he was seeing other people and had eyes for other people, that hurt me really, really badly. So I would try to tell him. I would try to say, this hurts me. And he would say that I was crazy because we weren't in a relationship anymore. We weren't Facebook official anymore. So he could do whatever he wanted and that I was acting crazy. Can you go to the next slide, please? And this was a very, very toxic relationship. Like I said, I defined myself through every relationship that I had. So Sean telling me that my feelings weren't valid, I believe that. So every single time that I had a negative feeling or something that bothered me, I wouldn't say it. I would just push it down and I would lock it up because I didn't think one, it deserved to be felt, and two, it definitely didn't deserve to be expressed. So I suppressed everything inside of me. And I continued to do this. And as all this is going on, I'm still seeing Sean. This is about a year after our official breakup. And I'm getting worse with the foods I'm allowing myself to eat at the time. I started to restrict even more foods at the time. Lent was over by this time. So this wasn't even a part of Lent anymore. I was restricting a lot of foods and I started making a calorie goal for myself every day. And if I went over that calorie goal for the day, I felt like I had lost. But if I went under that calorie goal for the day, I felt like I had won. I associated a lot of my worth and pretty much all of my energy into the food that I was eating because I was just striving so hard to have that perfect body that I thought in turn would get me this perfect life, this perfect guy, this perfect meaningful future. And everything I did started to become an exercise, whether it was tapping my foot under the desk or walking around Walmart with my mom. I did everything I could to try to burn as much calories as I possibly could in a day. And I started to lose a significant amount of weight. And it started to affect my grades where I couldn't focus on school because all I could think about is what am I going to eat next? What am I not going to eat next? What lie am I going to tell to get away with not eating? And my parents started to notice that I was losing weight too. And one day, what they would do is they would put a scale in our kitchen. And this would happen about every 3 months or so. They would notice that my weight was going down. They would put the scale in the kitchen and they would ask me to step on it. And when I stepped on the scale and saw the number, they would completely freak out. They did not know what to do. And they would go, "Oh my God, Morgan, you need to eat or we're going to send you away somewhere." And then immediately I felt guilty because I thought, geez, I'm burdening these people and I don't want to get sent away somewhere. So what I would do is I would eat as much food as I possibly could in a very short amount of time at that time. And then afterward, I would have to sit with not only that uncomfortable, full physical feeling, but a really uncomfortable mental feeling of eating all of that food. And what I would do from there is I would go to the bathroom and I would force myself to throw up. And it became this cycle of really severely restricting my food for a very long time, like about 3 months or so. Something would trigger me, such as my parents checking my weight and telling me that I needed to eat. I would eat and I would binge and then I would purge after, and it became this cycle. And this is when I had developed my eating disorder. If you go to the next slide, please. So, my eating disorder is how I both stood out and disappeared. And what I mean by that is that I use it as a way to feel like I was special, to feel like I was thinner than everyone else, to feel like I was unique, like I had something on everyone else, like I had more willpower in some kind of way than everyone else. But at the same time, I did not like myself and I wanted to get rid of myself. And that's how I used it to disappear. And some of you might not be able to fully understand what this means because, from an outside perspective, an eating disorder is kind of like, okay, why don't you just eat? But the thing is, at that time, I couldn't just eat. It's a very dynamic and complex mental disorder, and I just could not get myself to. And to put it into perspective, it was all about control. I couldn't control that my parents didn't understand me. I could not control that my friends would leave me out. I could not control that Sean was not taking me back, but I could control what I ate and how much of it I ate. And that's something that I latched onto every single day. It was like a goal at the every single end of every single day. It gave me this feeling of meaning and purpose, like I had something to work towards every day. And I continued to do that. And finally, again, about after a year after Sean and I had officially broke up, he decided that he was going to cut things off between us for good. And about a week after him cutting things off between us for good, he ended up having another girlfriend. And I remember I was walking down the hallway at my school and I was scrolling through Twitter. And this is a day or so after he started dating this other girl. And there was a tweet by him. And he tweeted, "She is everything that you never were. Hashtag so happy." I remember when I saw that tweet, I immediately didn't know what to do. I felt so much emotion, so much overstimulus. I felt like I just had so many feelings, so many negative feelings, so much guilt and shame and hatred toward myself. I didn't know what to do with it all. So I went to the bathroom that day, and that was the first day that I had cut myself. If you go to the next slide, please. So, cutting myself was my negative coping mechanism. When I felt an overwhelming amount of emotions and I didn't know what to do with them, it was my way of releasing those emotions. It was a way for me to feel physical pain to distract myself momentarily from all that emotional pain that I was feeling. And short term, it worked. I did feel that release. But long term, this is not a sustainable coping mechanism. Now, if you look at my left wrist, it's going to be a little hard to see here on camera, but you'll see that I have a tattoo and it says create. And the reason it's on this left wrist is because this left wrist is the wrist that I used to cut. And now, whenever I feel the surge of overwhelming emotions and I somewhat have that urge again to let it out, release it in some way or shape or form, I can look down at that wrist that I used to harm and I can remember what I need to do now. And that's use a positive coping mechanism. And for me, that's creating. If you could go to the next slide. So, creating for me is my positive coping skill. For me, creating means exercising. It means listening to music. It means drawing. It means connecting with my loved ones. It means going on a hike. It means yoga. It means being able to create the life that I want for myself. But at the time, I didn't know that creating was an option. I didn't know what a positive coping skill even meant at that time. I didn't know the way that I was living my life was how I was getting by and surviving. I didn't know that there were other options or another way out or another way to deal with things. So I just continued to harm myself. And at this point in time, I realized that everything I was doing at this point, I wasn't even doing for Sean at this point because he wasn't even in my life at this point. I realized that everything that I was doing was because I didn't like myself. I wanted to get rid of myself, and I was hoping that everything that I was doing was the slowest, most painful suicide possible because that's what I thought that I deserved. Next slide, please. Even upon wishing and thinking about my life ending, I thought about other people. I could picture my mom tearing herself apart over my grave, wondering how she failed as a mother. I could picture my dad patting her back gently, convincing her we can't all beat our own inner demons. I could picture my brother holding hands with his girlfriend, realizing now that she is the only primary female in his life other than my mom. I could even picture my own dog running into my room, sniffing around as my mom's forced in there and tears well up in her eyes due to their memory of me. I could picture these people caring and these people being broken over me being gone, but I just could not get my own being to. The thing is, if I killed myself, I would die once, but everyone around me would die over and over again, trying to figure out where they went wrong, what they could have done differently. If I killed myself, I would have gotten rid of my pain, yes, but I'll also be passing that pain along to every single person that loves and cares about me deeply. But at that time, I couldn't even see it because I was just so blinded in this dark tunnel without seeing any kind of light or way out. And you may be thinking at this point, all right, you've gotten to a really bad point. Why haven't you gotten help by that time? And yes, I was very, very depressed by this time, but my depression had made me an excellent actress. If you go to the next slide, please. On the outside, everyone saw that I was happy, I was bubbly, I was fun, I was energetic. But on the inside, I felt numb. I felt hopelessness. I felt pain. I felt anger, and I felt sad. If someone had asked me how I was doing on any given day, my automated second nature response was, "Good, how are you?" Opening up and actually talking about how I was feeling deep down was not an option for me at that time. At this time, all of these mental illnesses I'm describing to you, they became my best friends. At the end of every single day, I didn't think that I could rely on my friends to make me happy. I knew I couldn't rely on Sean to make me happy. I didn't think I could rely on my family to make me happy. I didn't think I could rely on money to make me happy. But I knew that at the end of every single day, all of these mental illnesses would be waiting for me with open arms. And the closer I got to these best friends of mine, these newly found best friends, the more I started to realize that I was missing out on my life. If I had went to a family party, I would either bring my own food or I wouldn't eat at all. If my friends had asked me to go out and do something, I either didn't have the energy to do anything because I was just so hungry and so tired and so fatigued and so sad all the time, or I'd rather just lay in bed and plan whatever my next meal was going to be. I realized at this point in time that I was not actually living my life. I was just kind of surviving and going through the motions. And I thought to myself, what would it be like if I actually lived? And in the midst of these thoughts, they were all coming to me at once. I had a complete breakdown. And in the breakdown, I had like 5 seconds of courage where I decided, okay, I'm going to tell someone. So, in that 5 seconds of courage, I immediately told my parents everything, the things that they didn't know about. I told them that I was cutting myself. I told them that I was starving. I told them how sad I was all the time, how it was so hard for me to get out of bed and want to live the day, how I couldn't see a meaningful future, every kind of light at the end of the tunnel. And immediately after telling them, I wanted to take it all back because a huge part of me wanted to stay sick because, like I said, those mental illnesses were my best friends. They were only the thing that I felt like I was good at, like I was succeeding at in a sense. But a very, very, very small part of me did want to get better. And that was a part of me that reached out to my parents. And I couldn't take it back after I told them everything. And I'm lucky enough that I have parents that really wanted to help me get better. So, what they did is they took me to a treatment center to be evaluated. So they took me to the center to be evaluated. And the first thing that they did when I got to the treatment center was they gave me this gown and they told me to go change into it so they could then take my weight and my vitals. So I went into this room to change into this hospital gown and I looked into the mirror. Ironically enough, there was this huge mirror in this room that I was changing in. And I looked into it and I looked into my own eyes in that mirror. And I specifically remember thinking, wow, I'm a waste of life. And never would I ever thought that I felt like I was a waste of life, but in that moment I did. And that's when I knew that I had hit my absolute rock bottom. After I had changed and I got my weights and my vitals done, I was brought into this room with this woman named Angie. And she was there to talk about everything that was going on. And at this point, I didn't think I had anything to lose because my life felt like it was already wasting away as it was. So I just told her everything. I told her how I wasn't eating, how I was extremely afraid of certain foods, how I restricted my foods very severely. I was very obsessed with my body and how it looked. I was obsessed with exercise and burning as much calories as possible and being as perfect as possible. And she diagnosed me with anorexia nervosa. I told her about how I wasn't sleeping at night, how I'd wake up 10 to 20 times per night and I'd be checking my phone to see if Sean had texted or called me, or I'd wake up to hunger pains, really, really anxious for breakfast and whatever was going to happen for breakfast that next morning, whatever battle I'd face with my parents. And she diagnosed me with insomnia. I told her how I was really sad and a little bit numb to things, how I stopped looking both ways when crossing the street because I was hoping that something else could kill me for a change other than myself. And she had diagnosed me with depression. I told her about how I would get really, really hot and sweaty, and I'd have these racing negative thoughts that would come to my head, and I couldn't calm myself down. And it was like paralyzing to me in a sense. And she diagnosed me with anxiety. After receiving all of these diagnoses, she asked me to walk out of the room when she asked my parents to walk into the room. And I waited in the hallway for a good 15 minutes or so. And I finally went back into the room where my parents were. And my mom had this really stern, concerned look on her face. But my dad just had his face buried in his palms. And when he looked up from his palms, his face was beet red. And he just had tears pouring down his face. And he looked me in the eye and he said, "Morgan, we had no idea you were doing this to yourself." It's one thing to look at someone with your eyes, but it's another thing to look at someone with your mind. And in that moment, I never felt more connected with my dad in my whole life. And something to know about my dad is that he is a recovering alcoholic for the last 35 years. So he knows firsthand what it's like to be in these depths of pain, to be in that dark tunnel and not see that light out. And I could see very clearly that he was taking on that pain for me. And he was feeling it maybe even more than I felt because I was just so numb to everything at that time. And in that moment, I decided that I was going to go to treatment and I was going to get help. You go to the next slide. So, after all this happened, I was sent to a residential treatment center where I was going to live. And the first thing I had to do was I had to say goodbye to my parents, who were devastated at this time, rightfully so, but I couldn't really feel anything with them. So I just kind of said goodbye and pretended to be sad with them, and they went on their way. The second thing that had to happen when I was there is all the counselors had to go through my bag just to make sure that I didn't have anything that would be dangerous to myself or anyone else, anything I wasn't supposed to have. And immediately they went through and they found the razors that I had used to shave. And they took them away because I was someone that was struggling with cutting, which was, again, rightfully so. But I immediately wanted to throw a fit. Like I was about to freak out. I was like, "You can't take this away from me." But then I thought to myself, I stopped and I thought, okay, I can either not be able to have a razor and shave during treatment, or I could be tempted to cut myself. And eventually I accepted the fact that I would not have that razor in treatment. And as silly as and small as it sounds, this kind of set the tone for my entire stay at this treatment center. And that was accepting and doing the thing that short term sucked, but long term was going to be best for me. So after all this happened, I was immediately put into these group therapy groups with other people struggling with the exact same thing. And all these feelings that I talked about earlier that I was just suppressing and pushing down and locking up, I slowly started to let come up to the surface and I started to talk about them a little bit. And as I slowly started to talk about them a little bit, I noticed that other people in the group started to feel safe to talk about what they were going through too. And throughout that, I started to learn a little bit and I started to learn that I wasn't alone. You can go to the next slide, please. I thought that I was the only person in this world struggling with what I was struggling with. But it turns out a lot of people are struggling, and a lot of people want to get help too. I started to go to these therapy groups, and every single time I started to unlock a little bit more about those things that I was suppressing and not talking about. And it felt good every time that I did to be able to let it out. It wasn't living in me anymore, and other people were hearing me. My voice was being heard. I started to go to all my meals. I was going to meals at this time at the center, and I was completing the meals. I was finishing them. And I adhered to this. And eventually, with time, I was discharged. If you go to the next slide. And I started to learn when I was discharged that it gets better. But when I was discharged, I was not cured. I was going back to the exact same circumstances that I left. I was going back to the exact same school, the exact same friends, the exact same family, the exact same life. So, how was I supposed to get better in this world that I had gotten so sick in? But the thing about recovery is that it's about stamina. I had to wake up every single day and I had to choose to recover because I knew it was not going to be chosen for me. And some days I didn't choose it. But if you were to zoom out on my life and all the days that I did choose recovery, you would slowly see that although there were a lot of ups and downs and days that I didn't choose to recover, you would slowly see that it was slowly going up. And eventually I started to choose recovery more days than I didn't. And those days that I did choose to recover, they motivated me to choose more recovery more days as well. And I started to learn that the life beyond recovery was so much better. And that continued to motivate me as I began to see all the beautiful things that recovery was bringing in my life. For me, recovery came in bursts, where, for example, there was this one night, a few months out of treatment, that I hugged my mom goodnight. And I was so used to these just petty, meaningless goodnight hugs with her. And I just remember this one hug it wasn't the same. It was a thank you for living this day with me. I cannot wait to live the next one with you type of hug. Recovery came in realizations, where I began to realize I was putting so much energy into feeding all of these mental illnesses and all this negativity in my life. What would happen if I took that same energy and I used it to repel them? And I used it to start feeding my recovery instead. And recovery for me also came to me with letting go, where I began to forgive and began to learn that I was going to let myself forgive Jim and John. But I wasn't gonna forget how they made me feel and how they treated me. And that's not just for intimate relationships in the future, but friendships as well. Because I started to realize that I deserved to surround myself with people that actually cared, people that made me feel good about myself, not people that brought me down and made me feel worse and made me feel like I had to go to such extremes to be able to feel okay with myself. Recovery eventually came to me. And some takeaways I want to talk about that were very important in my recovery, if you go to the next slide, was one, to at least have one trusted adult. And this could be a lot of different people. This could be a parent. This could be an aunt or an uncle. This could be a teacher. This could be the school counselor. But just going to that one trusted adult and confiding in them made the biggest difference in the world for me because they had access to the resources that I didn't have on my own to find to help me get that proper treatment. Two, it's never too late or too early to get help. I very clearly waited way too long to get help, and you don't have to be as sick as me or look as sick as me to lastly be worthy of help. Because no matter where you are in your journey, we are all equally as worthy of help. If you go to the next slide, please. Here we have the suicide prevention talk and text line. I have personally used both and they are very, very helpful. So if you want to, I don't know if you guys have like a paper or something, if you want to write this down just to have that resource. But that is actually the end of my presentation to you. And I don't know exactly how much time you guys have left, but for what is worth, we can open for any questions and answers.
Oops. Thank you, Morgan. And we actually have resources as well for students with lines and information lines, as well as connections to support staff in the building that are here for them. So thank you for providing those. And then we have some too that are more local ones. I do think what we're going to do for questions is that Ms. Palladino is going to send out, if you guys check your emails now, you'll be receiving a Google form from Ms. Palladino. And that Google form is going to allow students to kind of reflect on some of what you've said today, Morgan, but also to open it up to us if there are any questions that we can answer here in the school building or for any of our students that are distance learners. I want to thank you, Morgan, for kind of sharing your story with our students and staff today and to allow us to even sort of hear both the positives and the negative struggles that you had. And it is really brave of you to share that information. And so thank you for that. I hope by listening to your story that students can kind of connect to the idea that there is a way and there is a time and a good time to get some support and some help. And again, we really, really appreciate you joining us at Wickford today. So I think we're going to have the questions be sent through the Google form. And then if there's anything that I cannot answer, or any of the support staff can't answer, we certainly can reach out to you as well, because now I have your email, so thank you. I do appreciate all of you joining us today, and for the great message, so thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. So all support staff are in the building today too. So if there's anyone who would like to talk to someone specifically, we are all in the building to help support you and even talk about this message today. Or even if one of the pods is having a conversation and you want someone to join you, we're certainly available to do that as well. Ms. Palladino, do you have anything else you want to say in closing?
No, I would just like to say thank you very much, Morgan. We really appreciate your time today. And boys and girls at Wickford, remember at WMS, we are connected.
We certainly are. And Morgan, we'll see you tonight for the parent meeting. All right, thank you.
Bye, and thank you.